Have you ever felt this way? You love someone with everything you have. You give, you endure, you bend only to wake up one day and realize they're gone. No explanation, no proper ending, just silence. If you've ever been caught in that storm of emotions, this video is for you. Today, I want to talk about silence, about withdrawal, and about how the Stoics chose to heal not through revenge, but through self-respect. Picture this. You're sitting alone after weeks of unanswered calls and unopened messages. Your inbox is empty, your phone never lights up, and yet your heart is screaming, why are they silent? But here's the truth. Most of us overlook sometimes. Silence is the answer. This video is not about going back, or proving your worth, or begging for closure. It's about choosing yourself. Because there comes a point in life when we no longer want to argue, no longer want to win in conversations, no longer want to hold on to someone just because of old memories. We choose silence, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, out of the deep realization that peace doesn't come from someone else's apology. It comes from forgiving yourself and moving forward. If you're in that place right now, this is your reminder. You don't need their closure to heal. Their silence is closure. Now, I want you to imagine this. You send a message. Maybe it's a simple check-in, maybe an apology, maybe something you've been dying to explain. Then you wait, 1 day, 2 days, a week, nothing. No reply, just silence. And in that silence, your mind starts racing. Did I do something wrong? Should I text again? Should I call? Sound familiar? If you've been there, and I know many of us have, especially as adults in our 30s, 40s, and beyond, then hear me clearly. You don't need their words to close your wound. You don't need a dramatic coffee shop goodbye or a handwritten note that wraps everything neatly. Because sometimes silence says everything. Over the years, in hundreds of therapy sessions, I've seen this pain again and again, and it's not always betrayal that hurts the most. For many people, especially after 35, it's the ambiguity. When something ends without clarity, when someone disappears without a word, when you're left holding 1,000 questions that will never be answered, they often say, "To me, I just want to understand why," or "I need closure to move on." I get it, I really do. But I've also witnessed this. Waiting for closure from the one who left is often just a way of postponing your own healing. Let me tell you about Caroline. She's 48, divorced 2 years now. Her husband left quietly. No arguments, no drama, just a divorce paper on the kitchen table with a short line. "I need to live for myself." Caroline tried everything: texts, calls, long emails, pouring her heart out. But there was nothing. No proper conversation, no respectful ending to what once felt sacred. And what cut her the deepest wasn't the divorce itself. It was not knowing why, but after 8 long months of battling the silence, Caroline sat across from me and said something that changed everything. I realized the explanation I was waiting for doesn't matter anymore. His silence, however cruel, was the answer. He didn't have the courage to stay, and he didn't have the respect to leave properly. And that's enough. That's the shift. That's healing. Understanding that you don't need to keep knocking on closed doors, because the silence you hear, that is your answer. You see, we often believe that closure is what helps us heal. But the truth is this: healing begins with an inner decision, the decision that you deserve clarity. And if they cannot give you that, then you must be the one to end the story. know what you might be thinking. But what about kindness? Grown adults should at least give each other some final words, right? Yes, in an ideal world, every relationship would end with grace. But life is not a novel. Not everyone has the courage to face emotional responsibility. Many choose the easier way, disappearing, ignoring, staying silent. And my friend, you cannot force someone to act like an adult if they are not ready. But you can be the adult for yourself by deciding not to wait any longer. Stoicism teaches us a simple but powerful truth. It's not what happens to you that hurts, it's how you respond. So let their silence be the ending. No words, no apologies, no final conversation. You don't need closure from them. You are the closure. You are the full stop, quiet, dignified, self-respecting. And from there, you move forward. Not because everything is explained, but because you have explained it to yourself. I know silence can sometimes be the hardest thing to bear, but other times, it's the deepest kind of release. And if you're still listening to me right now, maybe you, too, are waiting for someone to respond. So let me ask you this. Will you keep waiting for them to speak? Or will you choose silence as your own ending and finally move forward? 2. Emotional maturity comes from the ability not to react immediately. Have you ever felt this? Someone says something that cuts you and instantly you feel a wave rising inside you. You want to snap back, to defend yourself, to explain, maybe even to attack. It feels automatic, like if you don't say something right now, you'll lose ground. I've been there, and I know many people living after 35, after decades of real-life experience, still get caught in that reflexive reaction, and often, they regret it for days afterward. One of my clients, David, age 56, a senior executive at a large company, a highly educated, responsible man, confessed this to me during a session. I can manage a team of 200 people, but I still lose control. When my 17-year-old son says, "Dad, you don't understand anything," I can't stand it. I end up yelling back. And then, I regret it. Sound familiar? The truth is, emotional maturity has nothing to do with age, or success, or titles. It comes down to one thing: the ability to pause just for a moment before you react. In Stoicism, there's a beautiful idea. Silence is not retreat. It is a deliberate choice. Epictetus once said, "We cannot control what others do, but we can always control how we respond." The weak react instantly because their emotions dictate their actions. The strong pause. So let me ask you this. The last time you reacted too quickly, did you actually feel better afterward? And the last time you stayed silent, did you notice that the peace you felt was the real victory? It's like sitting across from someone who blames, criticizes, waiting for you to explode. But instead, you take a breath, you look at them and you say nothing. That moment is not weakness. That moment is strength. Psychology calls this the response pause. Just 6 to 10 seconds of not reacting allows your brain to shift from fight mode into analysis mode. You begin to guide your emotions instead of being dragged by them. Practice this often, and it becomes emotional intelligence in its purest form. And the best part is, you don't need anyone else to change. You only need to change yourself. I remember once, during a family dinner, my younger sister said something quite disrespectful in front of everyone. All eyes turned to me. I pressed my lips together, smiled softly, and I said nothing. Later, she texted me, "I'm sorry." I was tired and lost control of my words. I know you held back so I wouldn't feel embarrassed. If I had reacted right then, we might have ended up in a big argument. But instead, I chose silence and respect, spoke louder. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to have the perfect comeback every time. Sometimes, silence is the smartest answer, because people with high emotional intelligence aren't the ones who always speak correctly. They're the ones who know when to speak and when to save their energy for something that truly matters. I'm not telling you to swallow your feelings. I'm inviting you to pause. That one small pause before you react can save a relationship, or simply save you from regret. In the end, the most mature person is not the one who wins every debate. It's the one who knows what isn't worthy of their peace. Chasing someone who no longer sees you only pulls you further away from yourself. Now, I want you to picture this. You're standing on a long, empty road. The person you love, the one you care for, the one you thought would always stay is walking farther and farther away. And you keep running after them. You call, you text, you explain, you beg, but they don't stop. But still, you keep running, hoping that if you just try hard enough, they'll turn around. Have you ever been there? I have. And I know that feeling, that slow erosion of self-respect, the draining of your last drop of energy, all for the sake of holding on to something that, perhaps, was never truly yours. I've worked with hundreds of people between the ages of 35 and 65, and what wounds them the most is not being abandoned. It's being ignored while they're desperately trying to hold on. They don't just lose someone, they lose themselves in the process of trying to be seen, accepted, loved. And there's one thing I always tell them, a phrase that sounds simple, but takes immense courage to truly embrace. If you have to chase someone just to stay, then you are no longer yourself. I once had a client named Lisa, 42 years old, an executive, strong, independent, intelligent. But in my office, she wept like a child, because her boyfriend, the man she had loved for 3 years, suddenly grew cold, distant. He replied to messages hours late, cancelled plans at the last minute, dodged every serious conversation, and Lisa, though she knew deep down, still kept trying. She texted, "I just want to understand what's going on." She called, "Did I do something wrong?" She waited. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe he just needs time. I asked her, "What are you really trying to hold on to this? Is it love, or is it the feeling of being chosen?" She went silent, because the truth is sometimes we're not chasing the person. We're chasing the belief that we're good enough to not be left behind. But that's not love. That's fear of abandonment, dressed up as hope. Stoicism teaches us this. We should never place our self-worth in the hands of another. For when they leave, we are left with nothing. When you chase someone, you hand over all your emotional power. You let them decide who you are. You place your happiness in the hands of someone who doesn't care to hold it. You turn your own emotions into a hostage of their silence. And every time you send one more message, every time you try to explain why you love them, you are withdrawing pieces of your own dignity just to place them in their hands. Behavioral psychology shows us people value what they must put effort into keeping. When you give to easily, especially love, forgiveness, loyalty without equal effort in return, you unintentionally lower your own value in their eyes. The more you chase, the further they run. Not because you're not enough, but because they never had to work for you. And trust me, someone who doesn't have to work for you will never work to keep you. So if you're in a relationship where you are the only one trying, ask yourself honestly, am I fighting for love? Or am I just trying to prove my worth to someone unworthy of seeing it? You were not born to chase anyone. You don't need to run after someone in order to be lovable. You only need to stand firm, so the one who's truly worthy of you can finally walk toward you. I know letting go is never easy. It feels like pulling yourself out of a beautiful dream you don't want to wake up from. But sometimes, waking up is the only way to heal. And the truth is you're not losing them. You're finding yourself. Again, after all those days of chasing someone who never turned back. Point 4. You don't walk away to hurt them. You walk away to heal yourself. I want to tell you something you may have never heard from anyone, but I hope today it reaches the deepest part of you. You don't leave to hurt them. You leave to heal yourself. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But for those who have loved deeply, who have given their whole heart, walking away is never an easy choice. Because you're not just leaving a person, you're leaving a part of yourself, the part that kept whispering, maybe they'll change. Maybe I should stay just a little longer. Not long ago, I worked with a woman named Marianne. She was 51, a mother, a wife, a hard-working employee, and someone who had spent nearly 20 years in a marriage built on silence. There was no violence, no obvious betrayal, just a growing coldness, a nameless distance, endless evenings with no conversation, hugs that became obligations, I love us that grew rare, then vanished, and Marianne stayed for the kids, for responsibility, for the belief that this is just a phase. Until one day, in a counseling session, she broke down and cried, I don't recognize myself anymore. I've tried so hard to keep everything peaceful, but it feels like I'm slowly dying in silence. Have you ever felt that way? Here's the problem. We are taught that leaving is selfish. That if you go quiet, if you withdraw, if you don't explain, you're the one in the wrong. But no one teaches us this. Staying in something that is breaking you, that is the real betrayal. Not betrayal of the other person, but betrayal of yourself. Stoicism doesn't teach us to be cold. It teaches us to be clear. Clear about our boundaries. Clear about our worth. Clear about the truth that love should not make you feel small, exhausted, or lonely inside the very heart that is supposed to be your home. When you choose silence and walk away, it isn't punishment. It is the deepest act of self-love. Psychology calls this healthy separation. It's when you don't leave out of anger or hate, but because you recognize that your very presence is being wounded, day after day. You don't need shouting. You don't need a dramatic reason. You only need the truth that you are no longer yourself if you stay, and that is reason enough to go. I remember once, an old friend messaged me after almost 7 years of no contact. He wrote, I still don't understand why you went silent and walked away from our friendship. You never explained. Do you know how much that hurt me? I read his message. I breathed, and then I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, not because I looked down on him, but because I had let go of the need to be understood. He had the right to feel hurt, but I also had the right to protect my peace. Do you know what the hardest part is? It's walking away without needing them to realize how much you mattered. It's choosing silence without needing anyone to regret losing you. It's healing without needing an apology. That is the height of emotional maturity. Because when you stop trying to prove anything to anyone, you finally return to yourself. So if you're considering leaving a relationship that is wounding you, remember this. You don't have to hurt someone else just to earn the right to live for yourself. Choosing to walk away doesn't make you the bad person. It simply proves that you were brave enough to choose yourself. 5. Forgiveness does not mean allowing them back in. Let me ask you something. Have you ever forgiven someone? Someone who hurt you deeply, but you still opened your heart and said, "I forgive you." And then they came back with a soft smile, a casual hello, as if nothing had ever happened. They assumed that because you forgave them, every door would be wide open again. But you stood there in the silence, asking yourself, does forgiveness mean I have to let them back in? In over 30 years of working with adults, especially men and women in their 40s and 50s, I've learned something important. So many people confuse forgiveness with permission. They believe that if they've shown grace, if they've moved past the pain, then they must continue to open themselves up. No, forgiveness is an inner journey. Allowing someone back into your life, that is a rational decision. I once had a client named Robert, 58 years old. His wife betrayed him after 25 years of marriage, and yet he chose to forgive, not because he was weak, but because he didn't want to carry hatred inside. 3 years after their divorce, his ex-wife returned. She said she had changed, that she finally understood her mistake. Robert came to me and asked, "I'm not angry anymore, but does that mean I should take her back?" I looked at him and said, "You have released the past, that is forgiveness. But whether you want to build a future with her, again, that is your freedom. And no one has the right to force you to say yes just because you were kind." Stoicism teaches us this. No one can hurt you twice, lest you hand them the power to. Forgiveness is an act of mastery. It says, I choose peace over resentment. But Stoicism also reminds us of this. Kindness does not mean the absence of boundaries, and the silence of forgiveness should never be mistaken for weakness. Psychology shows us that people tend to repeat old patterns unless new boundaries are established. That means if you forgive without setting limits, you may be reopening the door to the same wound. Yes, you can forgive someone who hurt you, but that doesn't make them worthy of a place in your life again. I know what you might be thinking. If I forgive but don't let them back in, doesn't that make me too harsh? No, my friend, that is conscious love. There are people you forgiven, then you let them go forever. That doesn't make you bitter. On the contrary, it proves you've grown enough to understand this truth. Love should never cost you yourself, not again. I once met a woman named Alina, 46 years old. Her best friend betrayed her after more than 20 years of friendship. She forgave, but she didn't go back. When I asked why, she said, "I'm not angry anymore. I hold no grudge, but I can't forget how it felt to be betrayed. And I don't ever want to put myself in that position again with anyone." I believe Alina understood something many people spend their whole lives never learning. Forgiveness is what you do for your heart. Distance is what you do to keep your mind healthy. So if you've forgiven someone, but still chosen not to, let them back into your life. I want you to know this. You are not wrong. You are not cold. You are simply protecting yourself. Kindness is not meant to be exploited. Compassion is not an open door. And a forgiving heart can still close the door gently, quietly, but firmly. 6. You don't need to be understood. You only need to respect yourself. Have you ever tried to explain your heart to someone, and they just wouldn't listen? You wrote long messages. You talked for hours. You tried everything to make them see that you meant no harm, that you only wanted to love, that you didn't want things to turn out badly, and yet, after all that, they still misunderstood you. Or worse, they chose not to understand, and you were left feeling disappointed, wounded, and above all, invisible. In my work with hundreds of people in midlife, I've heard the same quiet pain over and over again. I just wish they understood me. I wish they knew I never meant to hurt them. I poured my heart out, but they still didn't get it. But you know what? Sometimes the problem isn't how you speak. It's that they never truly wanted to listen. A Stoic never tries to convince anyone, because they understand one simple truth. No one is obligated to understand me, but I am obligated to respect myself even when I'm misunderstood. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Live in accordance with the right, and let others think what they will." When you grasp this, you begin to release one of life's heaviest burdens, the need to be understood. I once worked with a man named Jonathan, 47 years old, a divorced single father, still trying to keep a good relationship with his ex-wife, the sake of their young daughter. He told me that every time there was conflict, he would write long messages to explain, to make sure his ex knew he wasn't trying to control her, wasn't trying to intrude. He was only concerned about their child. But the replies were always the same. "You're just trying to manipulate. You just want to prove you're right. I don't have time for your excuses." And then Jonathan broke down in tears. Not because his messages were blocked, but because he had tried so hard to be understood and lead to be seen as manipulative. I looked at him gently and said, "Maybe the problem isn't that you haven't said enough, but that she's no longer willing to listen. And when that happens, every explanation is wasted breath. When you try to be understood, what you're really trying to protect is your image of yourself, and that's natural. But if you keep doing this in front of someone who has no real intention to connect, you're sacrificing your self-respect. You'll write things that later make you cringe. You'll say things you didn't need to say, and you'll walk away feeling small, weak, and worthless. Why? Because you're fighting for something you should never have surrendered in the first place. Your dignity. Self-respect is not arrogance. Self-respect is knowing this. I don't need you to understand me for me to have the right to live as myself. And the truth is, those who are worthy will never need endless explanations. They will ask, they will listen, they will try to understand because they care. But those who constantly twist your words, distort your meaning, or make you feel like you must explain yourself over and over just to be valid, they are not lacking comprehension. They are lacking the intention to connect with you. So if you are in a relationship, whether romantic, family, or work, and you find yourself always having to explain who you are, stop instead of asking, "How do I make them understand me?" Ask yourself, "Am I respecting myself?" Because when you respect yourself, you begin to set boundaries. And when there are boundaries, you don't need to shout to be heard. You only need silence and the courage to walk away. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need to explain every action, every emotion, every mistake from your past. You only need the courage to say to yourself, "I know who I am. I know I am kind. I know I am learning to love and live better every day." And that is enough. 7. They don't miss you. They miss the feeling of controlling you. Have you ever heard this line? "I miss you," a sudden message, a call from the past, words that arrive after months of you trying to forget, trying to heal, trying to move forward. And in that moment, your heart stirs. You wonder, do they really miss me? Is the love we had still there? But my friend, take a slow breath and ask a far more important question. Do they miss me, more do they miss the feeling of controlling me? I've sat with countless men and women in their 40s and beyond, telling me about those sudden, unexpected returns from someone they once loved. The person who left without a word. The one who abandoned them when they were most vulnerable. The one who treated their presence as a given. And then, after months or years of silence, they reappeared with just one simple line. I miss you. Do you know what often happens next? The one hearing those words doesn't feel loved. They feel conflicted, caught between hope and suspicion, because deep down, a part of them begins to recognize this might not be love at all. In behavioral psychology, there's something called phantom control. It's when someone who once had power over your emotions, though they're long gone, remains haunted by the question, do I still have influence over them? They don't miss you for who you are, they miss the power you once gave them. The power to make you wait, the power to make you cry, the power to push you into explaining, apologizing, shrinking yourself just to keep them. And when you cut that power off with silence, when you no longer respond, no longer chase, no longer care, they can't stand it. Not because of love, but because losing control makes them feel worthless. I once counseled a woman named Naomi, 52 years old. She had been in a damaging relationship for nearly 7 years. That man never hit her. He never openly cheated. But every time Naomi said no, he punished her with silence. Every time she expressed her feelings, he told her she was too sensitive. And slowly, she learned to shrink herself just to keep the peace. Eventually, Naomi walked away, quietly, no drama, no accusations. She simply stopped texting, stopped explaining, stopped needing to be understood. 6 months later, he called her. I miss you. I can't live without you. And Naomi looked at me and asked, has he really changed? I asked her, does he miss you? Does he miss the feeling of having you under his control? Naomi went silent, and then the tears came, because she knew that question was already the answer. Stoicism teaches us this: those who cannot control themselves will always try to control others, and someone who is emotionally mature will never come back to you with just a shallow "I miss you." They'll come back with actions clear, consistent, responsible. They won't just say they miss you, they'll own their mistakes. They won't just show up, they'll prove they've changed. They won't just bring up old memories. They'll work to rebuild trust. But if all they say is "I miss you," hoping you'll soften like before, that's not connection. That's emotional manipulation. I want you to ask yourself, when they say they miss you, do they ask what you went through while they were gone? Do they apologize, take responsibility, or are they just trying to pull you back into the familiar place where you once felt weak? Do they miss you, or do they miss the vulnerable version of you? The quieter you become, the more uneasy they grow. Not because you suddenly matter more, but because they can no longer read you. And manipulators hate mystery the most. My friend, you are not anyone's emotional draft. You are not a place for someone to leave, come back, and demand a second chance without bringing real change. And you owe nothing. Not even a reply to when I miss you that isn't rooted in love, but in their need to reclaim lost power. Your silence is the voice of your maturity, not revenge, but a quiet declaration. I've changed, and I will no longer remain where I was once controlled by my own emptiness. 8. You no longer need to win the argument, because you've already won by choosing peace. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever felt like you had to win an argument just to be respected? Like you had to craft the sharpest reasoning, prove that you were right, say the final word just to force the other person into silence? If you've ever felt that, why, understand. I've been there too. I once believed that winning the argument was how I could hold on to my worth, until I realized peace is the greater victory. I once counseled a man named Daniel, 55 years old, a successful leader, razor sharp with words. He told me his ex-wife always had to fight to the end, and so did he. Neither would back down. Every disagreement became a battle over who was right, who was wrong, who would give in first. But after the divorce, Daniel sighed and told me, I won so many arguments, but I lost my marriage. That sentence haunted me, because it reminded me of this truth. We can win with logic, and still fail in love. Stoicism does not encourage silence so you can lose. It simply asks you one question. Do you want to win, or do you want peace? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste your words on those who have already closed their ears to the truth." What does that mean? It means you don't need to speak louder, sharper, or longer just to be acknowledged. Sometimes, silence at the right moment is the most elegant full stop. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've grown enough to know you don't need to speak every time. I remember a client of mine, a high school teacher named Maria, 46 years old. She told me, I used to think that if I didn't fight back, I would look weak. But after staying silent during an argument with my ex, I realized I wasn't weak. I just no longer needed to prove anything. Maria didn't need to win. She needed to protect her inner quiet, something many people spend a lifetime searching for, but never find. You see, people often argue not for truth, but for a sense of safety. We're afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of losing our value, afraid that if someone else has the last word, they somehow have more power. So we push to argue until the end. We send the last text. We write the 5-page explanation, hoping this time they'll finally understand. But here's the truth. Someone doesn't want to understand. No amount of words will ever change that. I learned this from my own life. I no longer need to win, because I no longer fear losing. When you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood, no longer afraid of losing face, no longer afraid of someone holding the wrong opinion of you, you feel a deep relief. You begin to understand that you don't need to teach someone how to respect you. You don't need the last word to feel at peace. You don't need to be right to be worthy of love. You only need peace. I live by a simple principle. If an argument doesn't lead to connection, then winning is meaningless. Maturity isn't about always being right. It's about knowing when being right no longer matters. And here's the beautiful part. When you choose peace over winning, you begin to attract people who are also seeking peace. Not people who want to defeat you with words. You don't need the last word. You don't need to wrap up a conversation to prove your wisdom. You don't need to win the debate, to be the victor. Because sometimes the real victory is in choosing silence and walking away. Not with bitterness, not with hate, but with the quiet strength of choosing yourself and your inner peace. 9. Silence is the voice of maturity. I am no longer the same. In the previous video, I shared this truth. They don't miss you. They miss the feeling of controlling you. And do you know what happens when you're no longer under someone's control? You grow quiet. You stop writing long 3-paragraph messages. You stop calling for a last conversation. You stop needing them to understand, to regret, or to come back. You choose silence, and that is not revenge. It's proof that you've grown. I once spoke with a woman named Kathleen, 49 years old, who had been in an emotionally controlling relationship. The man never hit her, never shouted at her, but every small action was picked apart, twisted, with jealousy and manipulated with words. You don't know how to love. I only do this because I care. If you leave, you'll never find anyone better. She left 3 times, and 3 times she went back, until the last time she left without warning. No tears, no justifications, only silence. When I asked what made it different this time, she said, "I didn't leave to teach him a lesson. I stayed silent because I was different, and I didn't need to prove it with words anymore." Stoicism calls this the stillness of self-respect. You don't need noise to prove your strength. You don't need drama to show you've changed. And you certainly don't need to win by making them regret losing you. You only need silence with an inner strength firm enough not to be pulled back again. That is not punishment. That is protection. Those who once manipulated or controlled you, they don't fear your anger. They know how to twist and exploit that. What they fear most is your silence. Because when you are silent, they no longer know what you're thinking. They can't read you. They no longer know which button to press to make you react. And that loss of control is something they cannot stand. I once worked with a man named Greg, 57 years old, who had been manipulated by his ex-wife with guilt for many years. She didn't need to shout. All she had to say was, "You're not a good man. Your daughter will be disappointed in you. I sacrificed everything for you, now you're leaving me." And Greg kept going back, over and over, trying to be the good guy. Until one day, he told me, "I don't argue anymore. I don't send extra money beyond the agreement. I don't reply to her attacking texts. I just stay silent. And I feel a peace I've never known before." His silence wasn't surrender. It was the realization that he no longer needed to fight battles that weren't his to fight. So let me say this to you: if today you are choosing silence, you are different now. And that's why you no longer need to say anything at all. You are no longer the one who has to explain. No longer the one responsible for carrying someone else's emotions. No longer the one afraid of being misunderstood if you don't answer right away. You are the kind of person who knows this truth. If you have to explain yourself too much, maybe you're in the wrong place. You know you've truly grown when you no longer need the last word in an argument. An apology from someone who was never sorry. The validation of "you were wrong, I was right." Letting go doesn't mean you're weak. Staying silent doesn't mean you're careless. It simply means you've understood your limits, and you refuse to keep being hurt. If they text you and you don't reply, if they come back and you don't open the door, if they pour out their excuses and you don't react, they'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're not who you used to be anymore. And you know what? They're right. You're not who you used to be. You are the awakened version of yourself. You are strong enough to choose silence instead of repeating the same. Cycle 10. You don't need a perfect ending. Silence is enough. Have you ever sat staring at your phone, typing, deleting, typing again, then deleting, thinking just one last message, just to make things clear? Maybe then I'll feel lighter. I know that feeling, that longing for a clean ending, the desire to be understood, to be thanked, or at least to be acknowledged that you once loved with all your heart, but then you don't send it. You don't call. You don't go back. Because you realize something powerful. A perfect ending doesn't need words. Sometimes silence is the kindest way to leave. There's something I often tell the men and women I work with in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Closure doesn't come from the other person. Closure comes from you. We often think, if they apologize, I can finally let go. If I get to say everything in my heart, I'll feel relief. If they admit they were wrong, it'll be easier to move on. But do you see, waiting for them to give you closure is putting the power in their hands. And the person who hurt you should never be the one holding the key to your ending. I once had a client, Anne, 53 years old. After 7 years together, the man she loved walked away without a word of explanation. She was devastated. She wrote a 4-page letter filled with tears and love. But then she tore it up. When I asked her why, she said, "Because I wasn't writing it for him to understand. I was writing it for me to understand myself." And once she finished, she realized, I no longer need his reply. I no longer need a proper ending wrapped in words. Silence, that is how I end this story with dignity. A Stoic understands this. You don't need the last word to find peace. You don't need the final line to feel whole. Life isn't a movie that needs a perfectly scripted ending. Real life only asks that you step back with clarity in your heart. No arguing, no blaming, no more explanations. I know you gave so much. I know you tried everything to keep that connection alive. But now it's time to realize you no longer need to prove anything. The right person would never have left you to fight alone. A decent person would never have let you walk away in uncertainty and doubt. So why keep writing to someone who never truly read your heart with sincerity? I want you to ask yourself just one question. Am I writing this message because they deserve to hear it? Or because I'm clinging to the illusion that I'll finally be acknowledged? If the answer is the second, stop. Put the phone down. Sit up straight. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and whisper to yourself, I am enough, and I am done. Here's a sad but undeniable truth. The people who hurt us rarely give us a beautiful ending, because they don't have the courage to face the fact that they were the reason you had to leave. They leave you to figure it out, to endure, to stitch together the wounds they caused. And then, when you fall silent, they panic, because now they have nothing left to hold on to. No final conversation, no door left open. It was you through your silence who closed that door. So let me say this to you, as a friend, as someone who has walked through long winters of pain. You don't need to say goodbye. Your silence, if it comes from awareness, is already the kindest farewell. You didn't disappear. You're not heartless. You're simply no longer staying in a place where you aren't valued. And that may be the most beautiful thing you could ever do for yourself. 11. I don't need you to understand. I only need peace. Have you ever found yourself in this situation? You sit down, your heart heavy, your mind overflowing with words that feel like they'll burst out. Of you think, if I could just say it, or they'll understand. If I could just explain, clearly they'll come back, or at least apologize. But then you realize they're not listening. Not because you haven't said enough, but because they never intended to listen in the first place. As a sick man, I've witnessed this in hundreds of lives, from couples to parents and children, even in workplace relationships. You keep talking, they keep nodding, but inside they never take in a single word. And then you're exhausted. That's when you need to ask yourself, am I speaking to be understood? Am I just clinging to the illusion that they'll change? Psychology shows us this. When someone lacks the capacity for empathy, the more you speak, the more they resist. Because to them, every word you say feels like criticism, like an attack. They don't actually hear you. They only hear the echo of their own defensiveness. And so you keep repeating yourself in vain, like shouting into a canyon. No echo, no response. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach us to scream in order to be acknowledged. It teaches us something far deeper. Those who need to hear will hear. Those who don't want to understand won't, even if you pour out your whole heart. And when you stop talking, you don't lose. You simply choose peace over depletion. I once worked with a woman, aged 59. Her husband left quietly after 30 years of marriage. She didn't need him to come back, didn't need an apology, didn't need him to fix anything. She just wanted, once, to hear, I know you tried so hard, but he never said it, and maybe he never will. One day, she told me, I no longer need him to understand. Understanding myself is enough. I've said too much already. Now, I just want peace. That is the turning point of maturity. When you no longer need others to see you correctly. You only need to live true to yourself. You don't need to defend. You don't need to justify. Because the more you crave being understood, the more fragile you become. The more you hope they'll change their mind, the further you're pulled away from your own healing. The person who hurt you doesn't need to understand you for you to be at peace. Peace begins when you let go of the need to be understood by others, and you begin to understand yourself. Why are you silent? Why don't you answer the last message? Why did you walk away in silence? Not because you're running away, but because you've realized, I don't need to speak anymore. My stillness is enough to end it. I don't know how many words you're still carrying in your heart, unsaid. But I want you to know this. You don't need to explain everything to be forgiven. You don't need to be fully understood to be at peace. You only need to be still within yourself. And that begins with silence chosen and strong. 12. I don't return, not because of hatred, but because I've moved on. Have you ever experienced this? You leave after everything. You stay silent, not because you have nothing left to say, but because saying more wouldn't change a thing. And then, sometime later, you begin to hear the whispers. Does she think she's better than us? Why didn't he come back and face things properly? So they disappeared. Do they think that means they've won? They don't understand. They never did. And you know what? You don't need them to understand anymore. You don't need to go back just to create a perfect ending. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your growth. As someone who has worked with hundreds of clients, I can tell you this. When you walk out of a toxic relationship in silence, you're not just leaving that person, you're leaving behind an old version of yourself. And when you're no longer there to be controlled, they begin to rewrite the story about you. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you ran away. They'll say you've changed. And let me be clear. They say these things because you are no longer under their control, and that makes them uneasy. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be cold. It teaches you to be emotionally neutral, so you don't get dragged back into unhealthy conversations. And sometimes, the only way to protect your peace is not to return. Not because you hate, not because you fear, but because you understand. Some doors once closed are meant to stay closed. I remember a client, Laura, 47 years old. 2 years after leaving her indifferent husband, she rebuilt her life. Every day, she wrote one line in her journal. Today, I choose peace instead of trying to explain. Then one day, the man returned, with flowers, with apologies, with the words "I've changed." But Laura simply smiled and said, "I don't need you to acknowledge that I've changed, because I'm no longer the woman who needed that." Now, I want you to imagine this. You go back to prove that you've become stronger. You sit down with the person who once hurt you, hoping they'll finally see the new version of you. You lay out your mature reasoning, hoping they'll nod in recognition. But what happens? You've thrown yourself back into the same old energy. You're seeking validation from the very person you once had to leave in order to survive. That's not healing, that's relapse, disguised as wisdom. True healing doesn't need an audience. It happens quietly, like a wound closing on its own, unseen by anyone. And one day, you'll realize, I don't need to go back to show them I'm stronger. I only need to keep living, and that alone is proof enough. You don't need to win in order to walk away. You only need to believe you are worthy of a new chapter. One where you don't need to explain, don't need to play a role. Your absence is message enough. You don't need the old stage to perform a role that has already ended. So if you've ever thought, maybe I should go back, just to show them I've changed, I want you to try saying this instead. I'm not going back. Not because I hate, but because I have nothing left to prove. And if you're still quietly carrying old wounds, if you've been hoping someone will return to explain, to apologize, to fix things, I hope this video helps you realize one thing. You don't need them to come back. You don't need them to understand. You only need to understand that you are enough. Enough to deserve clarity. Enough to deserve unconditional love. Enough to deserve a new chapter where you are yourself, not a shadow of someone else. Let your silence be your final statement. Not surrender, but maturity. And if one day you feel the urge to type out a long message, to make that one last call, to explain just one more time, ask yourself, will this restore peace within me, or will it just drag me back into an old version of myself I've already outgrown? You don't need to be chosen anymore, because this time, you've chosen yourself. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this video spoke to you, leave a comment below. I don't need to close the old chapter, I only need to open the new one. And don't forget to share this video with someone you believe needs it right now. I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue learning how to live simply, deeply, and without needing anyone's approval to be ourselves.